So, introduction to no transhumanism lecture 8. I'm going to finish talking about consciousness today, I hope. Um, First, as usual, let's have a look at what's been happening in the world. Um, the last 2 days were the World AI Forum was held in India. So there's a lot of news about AI happened in the last 2 days, mainly from that forum. Article in the Atlantic: AI agents are taking America by storm. It's funny that last year I ran this class in the spring and we were talking about predictions of AI agents because they hadn't been introduced yet. That was just 12 months ago, and already the things we talked about are all happening right now. Um, so this is particularly based on, again, that Claude Code thing that came out we were talking about. Everyone's still talking about this and how many jobs it will take. So an example of this was this amazing article in the New York Times yesterday. Um, the AI disruption we've been waiting for has arrived. This article is written by a guy who runs a software consultancy. They build software for people. And what he says in this article is that when he's on his train ride, he works in New York City. When he's on his train ride into work, he builds software on his cell phone by sending uh, instructions to an AI vibe coding. And by the time he gets into work, he has built a piece of software that his company would have previously charged over $100,000 for. It's incredible what he was talking about, what they can do now in a very, very short space of time. Um, New agent frameworks coming out. This was announced this week, a new agent framework. Agents sitting on top of LLM models. And this was basically saying that um, if things change, you often have to have human intervention. But now there are new systems where they have this thing called group evolving agents, where the agents talk to each other and evolve and get better on their own without any human intervention, which is a pretty big deal. What did I say? Every day, another AI model. Um, 2 days ago, Anthropic announced Claude Sonnet 4.6, which replaces Claude Sonnet 4.5. They've updated their Claude model. Um, Interestingly, I was reading about how efficient these models are, and there's a nice little graph here that shows the number of tokens, which is in effect the cost of the AI system, against how good the AI system is. And at the moment, the two with the red lines there are Claude 4.6, which is outperforming all of the other models at the moment. But the two on the right there with 1.3, 130 million and 202 million are GPT 5.2, the different versions of GPT 5.2. And GPT 5.3 will probably come out in the next few days. They expect it to jump up and match Claude within the next few days. So, uh, another day, another AI LLM model comes out. Um, Money, lots of money, people are talking about at the moment. AI have just about secured their new $100 billion funding round which brings the value of their company, OpenAI, to $850 billion. That's nearly $1 trillion this company is worth, OpenAI. Um, in just 2 days ago, OpenAI bought OpenClaw. This is really important. Anyone know what OpenClaw is? OpenClaw is the language AI agents use to talk to each other. Remember I told you about Maltbot, where all the social media network for AI bots and agents? That works on OpenClaw. And so OpenAI have basically taken control of the language used for the bots to talk to each other. Um, no one's talked about, they haven't released how much they paid, but every article I read says it's about $15 billion they paid for this. Um, and the reason they were able to buy it is the guy who invented it was in Europe. Europe has much tighter AI regulations. So he moved OpenClaw to the US, where it was bought by OpenAI. Less regulation here. That's what he says why he sold it to OpenAI. And of course, immediately that happened, Meta and a bunch of other firms put restrictions on OpenClaw and told their developers they can't use it. They claimed it was over security fears, but obviously it's because OpenAI bought it. It's now owned by their competitor, so they don't want to be using it. So all these companies are starting to move away from OpenClaw because OpenAI bought it. But we'll see what happens with that. This has all happened in the last day or so. There were multiple articles saying that Apple are working on 3 new wearable AI devices. They're not absolutely sure what they are, but they are talking about a smart ring, a pendant, and AI augmented reality glasses. These are all due to come out before the end of this year. So Apple have been pretty quiet about this, but there's been multiple leaks in the last week about Apple developing these, and they'll be coming out very soon. Google, Sundar Pichai, who's the CEO of Google, announced that they're building at the AI summit in India. He announced that they're going to build a $20 billion AI hub in India. So, huge investment in India, AI infrastructure now. Also at the AI summit, uh, Alphabet announced they were going to be building a new set of robot-powered manufacturing plants or factories. And uh, Alphabet own Google. Alphabet is the parent company that owns Google. They also own this other company called Intrinsic, which is their robot arm of Alphabet. And Intrinsic have formed a partnership with Foxconn, who are one of the biggest developers of robotic manufacturing plants in China. And what the CEO of Intrinsic said was that at the moment, most manufacturing is done in the Far East or in the East because wages are lower and many Western companies can't compete. But if we switch to robotic manufacturing, the cost is the same in every country. So places like America can suddenly become very competitive again in manufacturing, and that's what they're aiming for. They announced today that Google's going to start building manufacturing stuff in America. I told you last week that Nvidia had just announced all these new graphical processing units, which are used for AI, and OpenAI AI have bought most of them. Meta just bought the rest of them. So Meta, and what's interesting about this article is Meta have just announced they intend to spend $135 billion on AI in the next year. $135 billion. This is an interesting one. Google have just announced a partnership with Shopee. Anyone know who Shopee is? Yeah? It's interesting the two Asian people. Shopee is like Amazon in Asia. $100 billion of sales every year. It's a sales platform. And Google are going to integrate their Gemini AI engine into that platform. Again, they're talking hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue here, expectations, so quite crazy. So all of that money stuff just happened in the last 2 days. Another day, another Chinese robot. This one is very weird. This one is it's not a research project. This is becoming commercially available. And they say it's called Moya. And they say this robot has a warm smile and a warm heart. Why did they say that? Because this robot has warm skin. Not creepy at all. I wonder what market they're aiming for. Yeah, well, it's a bit uncanny valley as well. There's a few photos of it, why she might freak you out. Yeah, yeah, really. Anyway, um, at the India summit, Sam Altman, in a talk at the summit, called for a global body to regulate the AI industry. He wants some global committee to regulate AI. Why do you think he wants that? Remember, this is a man who took the word safety out of their mission statement last week. So he's obviously doesn't care about AI safety. But why does he want a global body to regulate the AI industry? China. This is purely why he wants to do this. China. It's so obvious. Interesting little bit of body language in this photo. There's the Prime Minister of India, Sam Altman from AI, Dario Amodi from Anthropic next to him, and all the AI leaders stood in a line and held hands and lifted their hands. The only two people who didn't hold hands were Sam Altman and Dario Modi. They run the two biggest AI companies in the world who are in constant battle with each other. They didn't hold hands. Interesting bit of body language, but yeah. So there's been a whole bunch of more articles about the changing workplace. This is all back from that volcanic eruption of Anthropic's about the Claude thing and how it's going to impact the workplace in the last few weeks. This article was published in The Atlantic a couple of days ago. Again, they're talking about the predictions that white collar workers may only have 12 to 18 months left. So the same kind of things we've been seeing before, but The Atlantic they claim this is a worst case scenario, but. Klarna, who are one of the biggest fintech companies, financial technology companies, agrees with Dario Amodi. His claim is that in the next 4 years, we'll lose 30 to 50% of white collar workers. The governments, we actually have some AI statements from the government, which is unusual. We don't usually hear anything from government on AI, but this guy is vice chair of Federal Reserve. And in a speech, this wasn't at the AI summit, he gave a different speech. And he laid out three scenarios that could be caused by AI over the next decade or so, and none of them are very optimistic. Um, he was talking about mass unemployment, which will involve a restructuring of the whole economic framework for the country. Because there'll be so many people unemployed in America, we will have to think about changing the whole economic structure. His worst scenario involved all the AI companies going bankrupt because they can't afford energy costs, which are spiraling out of control. Um, and he said, if that happens, it could almost bankrupt America. And another interesting thing in his talk he talked about was he expects America to spend, uh, to go $1 trillion further into debt this year purely on AI spending. So the government is going to be spending almost $1 trillion on AI this year. So yeah, quite a scary talk by this guy recently. Same kind of thing was said by this guy at the AI summit in India. He's an AI executive who's worked for Google DeepMind, Elon Musk's XAI, and Meta. He's worked for all of them in AI, and now he works for the American government as a consultant. And he, in his talk in India, was saying there is no government plan for what's going to happen. We're in trouble. There's no government plan. And he said he predicts that the wealth disparity between the ultra rich and the rest of the population will get worse, and it will be enabled by AI. AI is going to make these rich people richer and the poor people poorer. So yeah, that was his talk, which again, very, very cheery. Um, I know this is very despondent, but the Washington Post published an editorial saying, don't worry about it. The automation of white collar tasks is not a catastrophe. And they go on to talk about when um, looms were introduced, weaving looms were introduced in the 19th century. People got other jobs and, we created more things. There was more demand for cloth and we could produce more. It benefited the economy. When ATMs came out, we thought bank teller jobs would go, but they actually opened more banks. So they're saying, so don't worry about it. AI will come along and they're saying, I mean, they've got this weird comment here that Goldman Sachs believe that 44% of legal tasks can be automated. And they said, ultimately, if we have less lawyers, is that a bad thing? Well, probably, yeah. There's a lot of people out of work. I don't know. But, I'm not convinced by this article, but read it for yourself, have a look. Um, there's a new term that therapists are using for people who are freaked out about losing their job to AI. No one's mental health improves when you're constantly told you may lose your job or never get a job. Uh, and this is called AI replacement dysfunction or AIRD. So, yeah, there's actually a term for it now that the therapists have. So, a few more oddities from AI that have appeared this week. Uh, this was an interesting article from a professor in England. Uh, he was talking about the Hindenburg disaster, which is when a huge airship um, set on fire and killed many, many people who were on the airship. Airships were uh, vaulted as the new form of transportation. They were cheap, they were efficient, and we thought we would be using them all over the world to transport people around. We had this one disaster and no one ever used them again. And he said, if we have a major disaster caused by AI, it will switch people off. All it will take is a problem with one piece of self-driving car software that causes multiple accidents, and people will stop using self-driving cars. Or an AI releases a gas from a chemical plant or destroys a nuclear power facility because it's been hacked into. All of a sudden, people will stop using AI in all these industries. So he says we've got to be really careful about, this one accident, big accident could turn the tide of AI, just like it did with the Hindenburg. So interesting article, something I hadn't really thought about it in that very specific way before. Um, there was an interview with Dario Amodi at the Indian summit, and he was asked particularly about his beliefs on the ethics of AI, and particularly about this thing with the Pentagon using Claude when they hijacked or kidnapped the Venezuelan prime minister. Um, and he was basically saying his contract with the American government is worth $200 million, but he'll walk away tomorrow if it's unethical, if he sees it as unethical. Anthropic do seem to have the most ethical beliefs in the AI community at the moment. So, worth watching them. This is an interesting one I hadn't come across before. Um, the level of AI automation in our food supply chains is incredible. From the production of food in agriculture, to the processing of food in the plants, to the transportation of food, to the actual wholesaling and storage of food, to the selling of food. All of that is governed by AI at the moment. And it was saying that there's some real problems. These AI systems shape decisions across everything. If any decision cannot be explained or reviewed, it's controlled by software rules. So, put simply, businesses choose automation to save time and costs. Decisions about food movement and access are made by systems that cannot be easily questioned or overridden. And so, if there's any issue at any stage, all this food just has to be thrown away. You can't override it. So all of a sudden, we're saving money by not employing people, but then we're wasting lots. And it was giving some astonishing figures about how much food is being wasted because these decisions can't be overrun as they used to be or overruled. This was a paper published this morning. And what's interesting about this paper is that electric vehicles and many aspects of renewable technology uses rare earth minerals. And so all over the world, there's a battle for mining rare earth minerals, and because the supply overall in the world is quite small. So what this group of scientists did is they built a database of over 60,000 different materials, and they ran experiments on all these materials in simulated AI. So the AI built a database, the AI ran experiments, and the AI identified 25 new minerals that can be used to replace these rare earths. This is going to change the economies of whole countries if this happens. Um, and they say they haven't tested them fully yet, but they now have 25 possible alternatives that didn't exist before. But what interested me is all this research was done by AI. The scientists told it what to do, the AI did everything. Something to watch out for, deepfake doctors. Many people use Zoom to talk to their doctors. Scammers are now creating deep fakes of real doctors to sell you fake medicine and make money off you. I'd never heard of this before. Quite crazy. Deep fake doctors. So you think you're talking over Zoom to your doctor, and it's a deep fake of your doctor, and they try and sell you something crazy. But my favorite story of the last 2 days, this is in Utah. An AI generated police report claimed a cop transformed into a frog. So they have a system in Utah where police reports are automatically generated by AI. And it's based on body cam footage, dialogue, written notes from the police officer. And in this particular incident, someone was pulled over and their child in the back of the car was listening to The Princess and the Frog. And that audio got integrated into the police report. And the report stated that the police officer transformed into a frog. Brilliant. My favorite story this week. So, obviously, there's still a need for checking there. But it's an interesting thing that the report, if you're arrested for something, the report is written by AI, kind of crazy what these things are taking over. Okay. Any questions or comments before I... Oh, again, 2 days. That was 2 days. Uh, any questions or comments before we go? No? All... Yeah, I mean, we're all quite happy with this. Just the world we live in. All right. So back to consciousness. So, um, we're in the philosophy section. We started by talking about the reason for doing this is eventually we want to get on to talk about machine consciousness. Can't do that unless you understand what consciousness is. We discussed Nagel and this idea of the way everyone discusses consciousness now is what is it like to be something? And remember this idea, Nagel talked about objective consciousness and subjective consciousness. And we're talking about this sensory experience of being something. We then looked at definitions of consciousness. In particular, we looked at these two opposing views of the dualist, believing that the human soul or spirit exists externally of the body, and the physicalists or materialists who believe that this is all we have. We watched the Vsauce one on consciousness, and he talked about, in particular, the problem of other minds, and we'll come back to that in a second. We then looked at some articles, and we finished by discussing David Chalmers splitting the problem into the easy and hard problems of consciousness, which is kind of how everyone splits it now. And we looked at this idea of the dog having functional awareness, then we have the sensory awareness, and then we have this higher thing that humans have of external self-awareness, being able to tell people how we feel and things like that. And that's where we finished. So I want to continue with another article and look at a couple of those things in more detail. Remember, you're still filling in question 2 here on the worksheet from this. So how do you know? So do keep making notes. How do you know you exist? This is a philosopher, Richard Swinburne, who wrote a book. And Swinburne is a dualist. He fully believes that we have a soul outside of the body. And one of his arguments for this in the book is this example here. So he says, suppose that the brain of one person let's call her Alexandra, is removed from her body. So this is very similar to, and her left hemisphere is transplanted into the brain of someone else. Let's call her Alex. And the right hemisphere is transplanted into someone else called Sandra. So both these people have their brain removed, and we put the left hemisphere in one, the right hemisphere in another. Remember from Vsauce, he talked about splitting a brain into two separate places. So both Alex and Sandra have an equal claim to be Alexandra. They both have a part of her brain and both remember much of her past life, but they could not be Alexandra, for then they would be the same person as each other. And you can't have the same person as each other. Clearly, they're not. Physicalists who claim there is no continuing self have to claim that each of these people will be partly Alexandra. But that makes no sense. Because in that case, before the operation, Alexandra would correctly expect to have parts of the experience of each of the subsequent persons. So Alexandra would continue on in these other people, but no subsequent person has experiences that are the mixtures of the experience of the two subsequent persons. So he says there are three possible results, but the only thing we know for certain is that these two new people are not Alexandra. And so he gives a very convincing argument that there is something outside which makes that person Alexandra. So there are many discussions like this where people provide these philosophical thought experiments, and we're going to look at more thought experiments in a minute. On the other hand, you have people like Daniel Dennett, who is a physicalist. Daniel Dennett died last year, very sad. He's, whether you agree with him or not, he was a very entertaining guy and wrote some fantastic books. His books I cannot recommend enough. They're really good, but always interesting to think about. Daniel Dennett has a very different view on consciousness. So let's just watch a minute or two of this video.
Most people think consciousness, whatever it is just supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. It's something so wonderful, 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 wonderful that we have to sort of divide the universe in two to make room for it, all on one side, all by itself. And I understand why they think that, and I think it's just wrong. It is wonderful. It's astonishingly wonderful, but it is not a miracle and it isn't magic. It's a bunch of tricks. And it really is. I like the comparison with magic because stage magic, of course, is not magic. It's a bunch of tricks. And consciousness is a bunch of tricks in the brain. And we're learning what those tricks are and how they fit together and why it seems to be so much more than that bunch of tricks. Now, for a lot of people, the very suggestion that that might be so is offensive or repugnant. They really don't like that idea. And they view it as an assault, sort of an assault on their dignity or their specialness. And I think that's a prime mistake. It's a mistake because it means if you think that way, you're going to systematically ignore the paths of exploration, of research that might tend to confirm that. And you're going to hold out for mystery. You're going to hold out for more specialness than is really there. And some people just can't help themselves. They can't take seriously. They won't take seriously the idea that consciousness is an amazing collection of sort of mundane tricks in the brain. And they say, oh, I just can't imagine it. And I say, No, you won't imagine it. You can imagine it. You're just not trying.
You can imagine it, you're just not trying. He's funny. But uh, I know some of you, we're having our discussion session on Tuesday here, online people. Some of you will be looking at Dennett, some of you will be looking at Chalmers. As I say, you're teaching other people, and it's not about whether you agree with them or not. It's about learning about um, their point of view and explaining it to other people. I am interested in your personal beliefs as well, of course, but it's about questioning from either side. I find myself, I'm a materialist and find myself questioned on this all the time when I read more books. So, um, one of the things that in the Vsauce video, he talked about the problem of other minds. Here's a new term for you. This is called solipsism, the problem of other minds. And this is a famous philosophical view that I am the only mind that exists. My mental states are the only mental states. So, and what this means, it is tied distinctly. Experience is everything that I experience. I only have what I experience, so that's the only thing that's real. Anything outside, physical objects, other people, could be happening in my head. How do I know? How do you know this is happening outside? So your consciousness is your existence, and that's all that exists. So this is this definition. Let's watch a quick little video about this. It's only a minute long. It's just so you learn this term, really. We're not going to go into it in detail.
How do I know that you exist? Well, I know that I exist, or at least that my mind does, but anything beyond that becomes pretty hard to prove. And that's solipsism, the idea that I can't know anything beyond my own mind. Some would take it a step further and say that nothing beyond one's own mind even exists. Sorry, other people. Pure solipsism is tough to find, but its influences can be seen in Descartes and Berkeley, who take the phrase mind over matter quite seriously. For Descartes, knowing you are thinking is the only way to know anything, and Berkeley thought that only minds exist at all, and that everything we experience is actually happening inside the mind of God. So how do you know that I exist? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time.
So, uh, yeah, so solipsism is there are two videos on it on the page. I'm not going to play the second one, it's longer, but if you want a bigger introduction to it, there's more there. And there's more information in the definition as well. So what I want to do now is we're going to talk about animal consciousness a little bit. Um, and whether animals are conscious. So before we do this, let's have a quick vote. Who thinks that dogs are conscious? Anyone in here? Just one person. Do you all think two? Put your hands up if you think so. A dog's conscious. Three, four. Oh, you five. 5 verse 3. Okay, 5 verse 3. Don't worry. People are still arguing about this question, whether dogs are conscious. It's not a easy answer. My answer is yes, I think they're conscious, but probably a different consciousness to the consciousness we have. So, um, there's So let's go back to this article. Remember this guy walking his dog Benji and it meets the groundhog. He talked about this idea of his dog has functional awareness. It knows there's a groundhog, it reacts to it, it does that. But look at the second thing he talked about was this idea of sensory experience, the qualia, the idea of knowing what it's like to see red, taste a strawberry, or feel pain. Dogs can't see red, by the way. They don't have enough cones of vision. But so um, you know, when a dog's eating a bone, does it have a sensory experience of eating that bone? You'd say, yeah. There is something it is like to be a dog eating a bone. Yeah? Remember Nagel's definition? It is like something to be that dog eating that bone. And it's something we can't experience from the dog's perspective. It has its own sensory experience. This idea of we can't know what it's like to be that other person or other animal. So the dogs seem to have the first two things here for consciousness. But they don't have the third one, the explicit self-awareness. You can't ask a dog how it feels, how it felt about something, and it can't explain it. And it doesn't spot the thing on its forehead if you put a marker on its head in a mirror. So people have been talking about this a lot, and here's an article on it. And what is the article called? What is it like to be a crab? Nagel again, always Nagel when we start discussing consciousness. And it starts by talking about this guy, Christoph Koch again. Remember the guy who had the bet with David Chalmers about consciousness, the neuroscientist? And Koch started working towards a theory, a neurobiological theory of consciousness. And he started working with this guy, Francis Crick. Crick is very famous. He got the Nobel Prize for discovering the double helix in DNA back in the 60s. And they were studying whether animals were conscious back in the 90s. And he started to say things like this. We assume that some species of animals, particularly higher mammals, have some essential features of consciousness. So there are things that are essential to consciousness, and animals have them, but not necessarily all of them. So they don't have that higher self-awareness. So we can do experiments on consciousness, and we can argue about whether an ant has consciousness or a plant. We don't know. But consciousness, the last line there, consciousness correlates to some extent with the degree of complexity of the nervous system. So, scientists have been saying for a long time that animals have some form of consciousness. So maybe we start thinking of it not as it's either on or off. You either have consciousness or you don't. There are different types of consciousness and a continuum. You can be very conscious or not very conscious. So think about the dog. It can have functional awareness and it can have sensory experience, a subjective sensory experience, but not the third one. So it has a different form of consciousness. What about a robot? We can easily make a robot have sensory awareness of its environment and react to it in all sorts of different ways and correlate it with things in an electronic brain. So number one's easy. What if we gave it number three, where it had self-awareness and it could talk about itself? It would have one and three without the qualia, the subjective experience. Would that be consciousness? Why is one and two consciousness and one and three not? So this idea of different forms of consciousness is important because that's how we can describe it with animals. So Only 2 years ago, 2024, a group of scientists worldwide, very, very distinguished scientists, signed a declaration on animal consciousness, saying that given current scientific research, animals are conscious. And guess, and it was the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness. Why was it in New York? David Chalmers, New York University, Center for Consciousness, they organized all this. So New York University is where it happened. And again, it talks about what is it like to be a bat. That's why you have to know this. Every single paper on consciousness talks about this. But what they say is, he said, sometimes people doubt the scientific evidence on this. He said, but I think that's wrong. I don't personally think that other animals have a verbal inner monologue like me, that they don't have this explicit self-awareness. But there are probably forms of consciousness that other animals have that I don't have. I don't have the subjective experience of a bat navigating a dark forest using echolocation. That's another form of subjective experience that I don't have. So, yeah, this idea that animals have, this is the important thing. What the scientists were saying is these animals have consciousness, but it's not the same as ours. But we still will call it consciousness, which opens the possibility for a different form of machine consciousness, obviously, which is where we're going to come back to. Do animals have consciousness? There are multiple experiments with multiple animals. And this is an experiment done with rats. Rats have evolved to hide in the dark. You put a rat in a space where there's a dark side and a light side, every single rat will go to the dark. So what they did was they start giving electric shocks to the rat when it goes in the dark space. The rat now goes to the light space. Is it a Pavlovian, purely neurological response, or is this animal making a decision based on new information and a sense of self and a subjective experience? So again, New York University neuroscientist, they start thinking about this, that, this is leading to some idea that it has a certain type of consciousness about this. Neurological experiments on smart birds, corvids, which are ravens and crows, etc., smarter than most of the other birds, they started doing sensory correlations, measuring what's going on in the brains of crows and seeing that they have sensory consciousness, subjective experience of consciousness that correlates with the same kind of thing we find in humans. Pigs playing video games. They teach pigs to play video games, and if it can get the ball into a certain position on a screen, it gets food. It's quite funny. They give it dog food. They used to give it M&Ms, but decided they were too unhealthy. So they now give it dog food, but as a treat. The pigs understand the goals and play these games. But as it says, there's nothing in natural behavior or evolutionary history that would in any way suggest that a pig should be able to do this. And so what we're seeing, which is interesting, which the scientists say, what makes these findings important in the pigs in this study are displaying self-agency, intentionality. They can recognize, just like the rats are doing, they can recognize that their actions make a difference in a particular environment, which is beyond just evolutionary neurological responses. So most scientists, yes, believe that animals are conscious. Any questions or comments about that before we go on? I'll let you fill in part two yourself with what you think. I'm now going to show you a few tests for consciousness, how we test human consciousness. The first one I'm going to show you a couple of clips from this TV show called Brain Spotting. It's my favorite, one of my favorite TV shows of all time. This guy, Ken Campbell, is very funny. He's an English comedian. He does all sorts of weird things. He once traveled out to the Solomon Islands and taught himself Pidgin English. Pidgin English only has 200 words. He then came back to England and ran a complete Shakespeare festival in Pidgin English. So he did the complete works of Shakespeare on stage with 200 words. You know, he does weird things like that. A very interesting character. But he did a couple of TV shows, one on quantum physics and one on artificial intelligence. They're both out of date now, but they're still my favorite documentaries on these subjects. And his one on AI was great. So I'm going to show you a clip. Apologies to Mac, who saw this clip in my other class. Some of you who've done my intro class will have seen part of this clip. This is Ken Campbell discussing consciousness with a philosopher called Galen Strawson from Cambridge University. And he's going to... and then discussing a certain thought experiment about consciousness.
Let's just suppose we do finally build a conscious machine. Wouldn't that mean we'd finally solved the mystery of consciousness? Isn't that precisely why we are trying to build them? So we can finally understand consciousness. And surely that's going to be enough to satisfy the philosophers.
Even if they built a machine that behaved just like we did, and we actually knew somehow that it was conscious, which I don't think we could know, even if we knew that it was conscious, they still wouldn't have explained it. Because, okay, we'd look at the physical stuff, there it would be, and we'd say, when that physical stuff is happening, this creature is having a conscious experience of tasting salami.
Yeah.
But then all we'd have once again is a correlation. That when you get this physical stuff, these microchips, whatever, you get the taste of salami.
Mm.
We know they correlate, but that doesn't explain anything. We can give this, imagine giving this incredibly complete story of all the physical goings on. Well, how could that ever explain? How could we ever understand how that was the basis of a sensory experience like seeing red or having a certain taste or feeling healthy? They can't seriously think that they've explained it, it seems to me.
Right.
I mean, I find it hard to understand what their conception of consciousness is if they think that they can explain it like that.
But surely if we knew everything that there was possibly to know about physically about a piece of artificial intelligence equipment or the brain, what else is there to know?
In fact, I can tell you a story that's very popular with philosophers. It's the story of the black and white room. It was invented by an Australian philosopher called Frank Jackson. What he imagines is a scientist called Mary, who is an expert on colour vision, on the whole physical basis of colour vision. According to the story, she lives all her life in a black and white room and she never ever sees anything but black and white. Okay, she knows everything there is to know about the physics of colour vision.
Yeah.
What happens in the brain when someone's in front of a red wall, say. Imagine she's got this scanner based on your brain, and she can look at your brain and she can say, okay, now you're seeing red, now you're seeing blue, now you're seeing green. And she's always right because she just knows what the physical basis is.
Yes.
But she herself has never seen anything but black and white. Now, the people who think that there's no problem about consciousness, the physicalists or materialists or artificial intelligence experts, say that there's nothing she doesn't know about color, but that seems to me clearly wrong. And the natural reply is, well, look, suppose you were to walk out of the black and white room for the first time in her life, see red or see Jackson Pollock painting or something. She would learn something new. She would experience something she has no clue about. And that is what it's like to see green or to see red or to see blue. Nothing in her science can have given her any basis for knowing what that's like.
No. The so we're back to these two alternative beliefs. You either believe that she's going to have this sensory qualia-like experience, or she's not. I think this whole actual experiment is flawed because what's going to happen is this is going to stimulate parts of her eye and her brain that have never been stimulated before because she's never seen color. So of course she's going to have a different experience, but we could that could be replicated in a machine. But I think it's a flawed thing because you're not comparing like with like. Knowing everything about something and seeing something for the first time is going to fire different parts of your brain. You're not comparing the same thing. But it's a thought experiment about these two opposing views of consciousness. Let's give you another one. The Chinese room experiment. This was invented by a philosopher called John Searle, and it's a thought experiment that attempts to prove that artificial intelligence cannot exhibit consciousness because machines cannot simply process information that they don't actually understand. And it's particularly about artificial intelligence. So let's have a look at the experiment.
60-second adventures in thought. Number 3, the Chinese room. Can a machine ever be truly called intelligent? American philosopher and Rhodes scholar John Searle certainly can. In 1980, he proposed the Chinese room thought experiment in order to challenge the concept of strong artificial intelligence, and not because of some 80s design fad. He imagines himself in a room with boxes of Chinese characters he can't understand, and a book of instructions which he can. If a Chinese speaker outside the room passes him messages under the door, Searle can follow instructions from the book to select an appropriate response. The person on the other side would think they're chatting with a Chinese speaker, just one who doesn't get out much, but really it's a confused philosopher. Now, according to Alan Turing, the father of computer science, if a computer program can convince a human they're communicating with another human, then it could be said to think. The Chinese room suggests that however well you program a computer, it doesn't understand Chinese, it only simulates that knowledge, which isn't really intelligence. But then sometimes humans aren't that intelligent either.
Oh. I'm going to show you another video of the Chinese room experiment from Brain Spotting with Ken Campbell, talking about it in a bit more depth. Searle comes across as very smug. He always does. He always seems to be very smug about being right all the time. But also in this clip, Ken Campbell talks about Marvin Minsky. Marvin Minsky is one of the greatest artificial intelligence scientists of all time. And Ken Campbell had just interviewed him before coming to see Searle. And obviously Minsky had a very different viewpoint to Searle. So he's comparing the two, just so you know who Minsky is when he mentions him.
So I wanted to know who this Searle geezer was that gave Marvin such a short circuit. To find out, it turned out I had to go to California, sunny California. According to Searle, the essence of consciousness is being aware of what's happening to you. experiencing sensations, having what he called qualia. When I met Searle, he agreed we were conscious machines. He was just adamant that we were a completely different species of machine from the digital computers that Marvin was looking at. He thought Marvin was just barking up the wrong technology. That's why he was such a thorn in Marvin's side.
Computational processes, just the manipulation of symbols by themselves, couldn't have consciousness. That isn't to say you couldn't make a conscious machine, but all the robot technology that I've seen is based on a fallacy. It's based on a fallacy that the way that humans work is digital and computational. So if you ask yourself, when I walk into a room and I go over and open a door on the other side of the room, how do I do it? Well, the idea that these guys have is I must be solving a whole lot of equations. I must be calculating distances and calculating angles and how much energy is needed. So when I reach out and pick up a glass of water, they think I'm doing a whole lot of mathematics. Now, I want to say I'm not doing any mathematics at all. I mean, I have to be conscious. I have to get this thing right in my visual field where I can see it, then I have to try to reach it. But I'm not doing a whole lot of equations. Now, their answer to that is to say, yeah, but unconsciously you're doing these equations. Now, why do they say that? Well, because given the technology, if you're going to build a machine that did it, it looks like the only way that you could do it would be to get a machine that would take in a whole lot of information and do a lot of mathematical processing on that information.
How would you test it for consciousness?
Well, the simplest way to test any system for being conscious is to be that system. I like to imagine the following thought experiment. There is a...
So he goes on to describe the Chinese room experiment, which we've just had explained to us. But let's jump past that because we've already explained it.
Getting these questions in, and I'm giving back the answers, not the right answers. But I don't understand a word of Chinese. I am a computer running a computer program for understanding Chinese, for answering questions in Chinese. But I still don't understand a word of Chinese. And if I don't understand Chinese on the basis of implementing the Chinese understanding program, then neither does any other digital computer understand Chinese on the basis of the program, because no computer has anything I don't have. That's all a computer has. Any computer just has rules for manipulating symbols. That's the power of the computer, right? It seems to me that is to say, I'm the computer. How much Chinese do I understand? Zilch. Nothing. I understand a word of Chinese. I can't tell Chinese writing from Japanese writing. And there's no way I could learn Chinese.
Sitting around in that environment, you're likely to pick up a bit.
Well, if so, then it goes beyond computation. Because computation is just manipulation of symbols. I might think,
So it sounds like a very convincing argument. You all think it's pretty convincing? Some people are nodding, okay. But think about it in a different way. So let's see if we can find... This is Searle talking about it again, but now let's see if we can find the stop.
We know what the symbols mean.
Now, the first time you hear that argument, it's kind of compelling. It's like, oh my God, it's just a person following the rules in a rule book. Here's the catch. The rule book is actually, it's not even a book. Like if it were actually a book that had lookup tables, it would be larger than the size of the universe because there's too many different cases of what you have to respond in which case. So if it's actually an algorithm for speaking Chinese, what does it look like? It looks like the inside of an LLM. Like, oh, okay, it has billions of numeric weights. And the weights get updated and different parts represent different high-level concepts. And the concepts interact with each other and reasoning steps happen about what's actually being discussed. If you're a human, who's manually using a scratch pad to implement every single step in an LLM, you're kind of like an NVIDIA H100 GPU. Yeah, you're going to be there for a very, very long time manually using a scratch pad to flip every bit that gets flipped in the operation of a NVIDIA GPU. We're talking many billions of operations. We're talking a rule book that is actually, many billions of weights worth of rules and many forward iterations through this large structure, like a neural network structure. And yeah, you're talking many, many individual steps. By the time you're seeing all of this happening, if this is all happening in, let's say, under a minute, then this is happening at like the speed of light. Like the guy following the rules, he's going at light speed. And if you look at all the signals flying around during that operation, if you look at how many little post-it notes have to move around, you're now looking at something which is actually as complex as the inside of one of these NVIDIA GPUs, or as complex as the inside of a human brain. You're looking at major data processing happening, like the metaphor of a rule doesn't capture it. And so, yes.
So, yeah. How it actually works isn't a rule book, because the rule book would be too big. And how a human does it is the processing of all these wakes, billions and billions of neurons interacting together, which is exactly what happens in an LLM. So it's not as clear-cut an argument as Searle always makes it out smugly to be. Any comments or questions? So this is often used as an argument against computers ever having consciousness, but it's a tricky one. I don't know why all these thought experiments are based around China, but they seem to be around China. Another one, the China brain. This was proposed in the 60s and 70s. They came up with this experiment. At the time, there was 1.4 billion people in China. So if we asked every single person in China, I mean, they used China because at the time it was the largest population on Earth. So if we ask every person in China to act as a single neuron, where information is coming in and going out, and we give them all walkie-talkies that connect to each other, would the country of China become conscious? Now, the human brain has a lot more neurons than that, but would it act as a brain? Would it act as a conscious brain? Daniel Dennett says yes. The people who invented the problem say no. And this is because of something called functionalism. This is very similar to materialism or physicalism, but instead of the brain is all there is, we start considering this as mental states. Mental states are what cause things, rather than just just the physical process itself. And so let's watch a video on this that explains it better than I can. And again, there isn't a right or wrong answer to this. Some people believe it will become conscious. Some people believe it won't.
The China brain thought experiment, conceived by philosopher Ned Block in 1978, is a powerful tool in the philosophy of mind used to critique functionalism. Functionalism is the theory that mental states are defined purely by their causal relations, their inputs, outputs, and relations to other mental states, rather than by the physical stuff, neurons or silicon, that realizes them. Bloch's scenario forces us to confront the possibility of a system that is functionally identical to a conscious mind, yet arguably lacks genuine subjective experience. The hypothetical and the hypothesis. The scenario asks us to imagine that the entire population of China, with its billion-plus inhabitants, is organized to precisely simulate the functional structure of a single human brain. Each person acts as an individual neuron, communicating with others via two-way radio or telephone to simulate the synaptic firing and signal transmission. The system, in its totality, receives sensory inputs, simulated by signals to the input neurons, processes information according to the rules of the neural network, and generates motor outputs, simulated by signals from the output neurons. Crucially, this system is a perfect functional duplicate of of a conscious human brain. According to strict functionalism, if the China brain performs the exact same functional role as a human brain, if the causal flowchart is identical, then it must possess the same mental states, including consciousness and qualia, the subjective, qualitative feel of experiences, like the redness of red or the ache of pain. Functionalists adhere to the principle of multiple realizability, suggesting that the substrate doesn't matter, only the function does. Block's intuition and the absence of subjectivity block.
So, there's more on the China brain on the page, articles and videos, etc. If you want to read a bit more about it on the Consciousness 2 page. The next thing I want to introduce you to is a famous philosophical thought experiment, the ship of Theseus, also called Theseus' paradox. This involved a ship in ancient Greece that went sailing every year, and over time, the planks of wood in the ship rotted. If you replace a plank in a ship, it's still the same ship. If you keep replacing them until all the planks have been replaced, is it the same ship? Or is it a different ship? And this is the thought experiment. There is a reason for me showing you this, which I'll show you in a second.
I'm Jennifer Wang. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Georgia. Today I'm going to talk about the Ship of Theseus puzzle. This puzzle was recorded by Plutarch, an ancient Greek historian, though it's come up in many different forms over the ages. It goes like this. Theseus was this great mythical hero of Athens who sailed off to Crete and slew the Minotaur, a creature with the head of a bull and the body of a man. After Theseus came back, his ship was left in the Athenian harbor as a memorial. Over centuries, the planks of the ship decayed and were gradually replaced. Now, it doesn't really matter that the planks decayed or that the ship still had masts and sails and other ship stuff too. We can simplify the story. Let's pretend that the ship of Theseus is a very simple ship made of 1,000 planks and nothing more. Let's also say that the planks are made of invincible wood, superwood, so that they never decay. In what I'll call scenario 1, the ship of Theseus has its 1,000 planks replaced very slowly over the course of 1,000 years. That's one plank a year. So here's the puzzle. Surely a ship can survive the replacement of one of its planks. In year 1, when the first plank is replaced, it's still the ship of Theseus. In year 2, when the second plank is replaced, it's still the ship of Theseus, and so on through year 1,000. But the ship at year 0, the original ship of Theseus, doesn't share any of the same parts with the ship at year 1,000, which we can call A. So how can A be the real ship of Theseus? Thomas Hobbes,
And there's many variants of this philosophical puzzle, but I want to talk about it from a different angle. Oh, I shouldn't have closed that. Sorry. Damn it. No, it's a China brain thought experiment. Where's my... So, I want to talk about it from a different angle. And it's John Searle again, the guy who invented the Chinese room experiment. He also came up with this one. He talks about zombies, and he came up with this idea of zombie attack. You have billions and billions of neurons in your brain. If I replace one neuron with a silicon replica that does exactly the same thing as all your other neurons, and it has the same connection weights, are you still you? Most people would say yes. If I replace 2 neurons out of the billions, you're still you. But then we start getting, when I replace 10%, 20%, 50%, your brain's still working in the same way, and eventually 100%. are you still you? Again, we come down to this idea. A dualist would say no, a physicalist would say yes. It's a thought experiment, and it leads us to all sorts of interesting science fiction ideas.
Gradual neural replacement. The only way to guarantee the digitized self is still me. Billions of nanobots permeate the brain. They bind to every neuron, mirroring the circuitry so perfectly, the mind never even blinks. Eventually, every function transfers bit by bit to the machine. And when that mind is encoded and quantum transmitted to the array, what remains on the table is just a body, just meat with the self gone. So, is the soul code truly identical to the original consciousness? They say they're varied. We've proven it again and again through quantum neural signature matches, causal topological isomorphism tests, and cryptographic hash checks. But I'm not so sure. And I'm not the only one who doesn't buy it. Now, a soul code can wear a mechanical shell and walk the physical world.
So we get these science fiction ideas of brain downloading, etc., or transference of the human consciousness to a machine. If the zombie attack, and we don't know if it's if the physicalist idea is true, we can literally copy the brain, replace the neurons with silicon, and you will still be you. If the dualists are right, you won't be. Again, we don't know the answer, but these are the experiments, the thought experiments that philosophers use to talk about these things. There's one last video. We don't have time to watch this one, unfortunately, but I might play it at the start of the next lecture. This is David Chalmers talking about zombies, but he's talking about philosophical zombies. I just want to point out at the bottom of the page, there's a great paper on Searle and Dennett's zombie theories, arguing about this. Might be useful for your readings for next week, for Tuesday, when we talk about this. It's a really good paper to have a look at, especially if you're doing Dennett. This paper actually supports dualism more than... So I've got one last video. We've only got 2 minutes. I want to play a couple of minutes of this video. Ken Campbell again, just to finish off talking about consciousness. It's only 2 or 3 minutes long.
I'm to invent my own thought experiment, to pit everything I'd learned from Minsky and Cog against all the philosophical doubt I'd heard, and see if I couldn't win the argument for one side or the other. Okay, let's imagine that I've built myself an android, and let's say, just to be modest, I just built myself a humble lizard android. Now, is a lizard conscious? Is it like something to be a lizard? Yeah, I would say it is like something to be a real lizard. Great. All right. Well, right. Now you watch my lizard for years and years and years. And in that time, it does everything that a real lizard ever does. It never does anything that a real lizard doesn't. I submit it just might be a lizard. No. No. It would be a zombie lizard which could do everything that a real lizard could do. But your lizard wouldn't have what we philosophers call the qualia, the sensations of experience that a real lizard would have. It would be like my chess machine. Well, you admit that you can't prove qualia exist. I mean, no one's actually seen one, have they? So qualia is just your word for the specialness of consciousness, yeah? Which you have no shred of proof exists, which you just kind of believe does. And because of this thing, which might or might not be, you're saying that my terrific lizard can't be conscious. Yeah, but you're just making my position out to sound ridiculous because it is. No, it's not. Just try listening just for a second. What I'm saying is that just because you built something that acts absolutely like a lizard doesn't mean to say that inside it's actually conscious of what it's doing and what it's feeling. I mean, it's like my chess machine. So this is a chess machine with legs. Yeah, I mean, you don't think my chess machine's conscious, do you? No. No, not even if I put a program in it. So it was smug when it won. So it was grumpy when it lost. No. No. Well, why should your lizard be any different? You know? Just because it's got a society of lizardy minds in there, that doesn't explain anything. Just because it behaves as if it is conscious doesn't mean to say it is. It certainly doesn't tell us why. Well, at least we're trying. Just because you and your philosophers haven't made any progress for 500 years, there's no need to get peevish just because we might be.
I love that ending. Just because the philosophers haven't made any progress for 500 years and neuroscience is making progress, don't get peevish about it. All right. I'll probably play that zombie video at the start of the next lecture, and then we're on Tuesday we'll be having our discussion. Okay.